In the sunroom of their Northern California estate, a recovering cardiac patient was about to overhear the conversation that would save her life. What started as a quiet evening of rest took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her husband's true intentions. Laura Chambers wasn't your typical housewife. For 15 years, she had spent her life building a successful home health consulting business, known for her sharp instincts and unwavering determination to help patients advocate for themselves. When she encountered the crackling baby monitor, broadcasting her husband's voice that September night, she had no idea she was walking into the most dangerous betrayal imaginable. Laura made a split-second decision to record what she heard, a choice that would lead to exposing a multi-state murder conspiracy. What began as a trusted marriage would become a fight for survival against impossible odds. The biotech industry would never be the same after a dead woman returned to testify against the serial killer who had shared her bed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The baby monitor crackled to life at 11:47 p.m., and I almost didn't listen. I'd been using the old device as a makeshift security system since my collapse 3 months ago. One receiver in the sunroom where I spent most of my recovery time, the other positioned near the front door to catch any late-night visitors. Living in our sprawling Northern California home had become lonelier than I'd expected, especially with Ethan working 18-hour days at his biotech company, and me still too weak to climb the stairs to our bedroom. The voices drifting through the static were familiar, my husband's measured baritone and Dr. Kent Moreland's slightly nasal tone. They must have been standing in the foyer, probably sharing one of Ethan's expensive single malts before Kent headed home after another one of his house calls. At first I smiled. Kent had been our family physician for 7 years, and his willingness to visit me at home during my recovery had been a godsend. The man was thorough, compassionate, and had guided me through the worst of my stress-induced cardiac episode with patience and skill. But then I heard my name. Laura's trust fund becomes accessible upon her death, Ethan was saying, his voice lower than usual. The full amount, plus the life insurance. It's substantial, Kent. More than substantial. I froze in my recliner, the book I'd been reading sliding off my lap onto the hardwood floor with a soft thud. And you're certain about the timing? Dr. Moreland's voice was clinical, detached, the same tone he used when discussing my medication schedule. She's been having episodes. The stress, the recovery. Her heart is already compromised. It wouldn't be unusual. My chest tightened, and for a moment I wondered if I was having another episode. But this was different. This was terror. The dosage needs to be precise, Kent continued. Too little and she'll just have symptoms. Too much and it becomes obvious. We need something that mimics her existing condition perfectly. I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands, my fingers barely able to swipe to the voice recorder app. The red dot appeared just as Ethan spoke again. When? Soon. Her next appointment is Thursday. I'll adjust her beta blockers then. Tell her it's a routine modification. The interaction with what I give her will be significant. But it has to look natural, Ethan. A heart attack brought on by the stress of recovery. Tragic, but not suspicious. And afterward? I'll be the attending physician when she's brought in. Natural causes, stress-related cardiac event. I'll sign the death certificate myself. The conversation continued, but their voices grew fainter as they moved toward the front door. I heard fragments, something about offshore accounts, about Kent's gambling debts, about cleaning up loose ends. Then the front door closed, and silence filled the house like a heavy blanket. I sat in that sunroom for 3 hours, replaying the recording over and over, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood, that my medication was making me paranoid, that the husband I'd loved for 15 years, who'd held my hand in the emergency room just months ago, wasn't planning to murder me. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face from earlier that evening when he'd brought me dinner. The way he'd watched me take my pills. The strange tenderness in his voice when he'd said, "Make sure you get some rest, sweetheart. You look tired." Had he been practicing? Rehearsing his grief? I thought about the past year. Really thought about it. Ethan's growing distance. The way he'd started handling all our finances alone. His insistence that I focus solely on my health and not worry about business matters. The new life insurance policy he'd mentioned in passing, the one he'd said was just good planning for people our age. I'd been so grateful for his care, so relieved to have a husband who could handle everything while I recovered. I'd never questioned why he'd suddenly become so protective, so controlling. Now I understood. He hadn't been protecting me. He'd been isolating me. At 3 a.m., I finally moved from the sunroom to the kitchen, my legs unsteady, not from illness, but from shock. I made coffee with shaking hands and sat at our granite island, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, pale, thin, diminished. When had I become so small? When had I stopped being Laura Chambers? The woman who'd built a successful home health consulting business from nothing and become simply Ethan's fragile wife. I opened my laptop and began searching our shared financial files, documents I hadn't looked at in months. What I found made my blood run cold. The life insurance policy was worth $3 million, more than double what I'd expected. My trust fund, inherited from my grandmother and largely untouched, contained another $8 million. Together with our other assets, my death would make Ethan a very wealthy man. But it was more than the money. I found credit card statements showing massive losses at high-end casinos, investment accounts drained to pay for his company's expansion, and loan documents I'd never seen before. Ethan was drowning in debt, and I was his life preserver. No, I was his sacrifice. The sun was beginning to rise when I finally closed the laptop. I had perhaps 12 hours before Ethan returned from his business trip to San Francisco. 12 hours to decide what to do with the most horrifying knowledge of my life. I could confront him, demand an explanation, call the police. But as I sat there in our perfect kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built together, I realized how naive that sounded. Ethan was respected, successful, charming. Dr. Moreland was a pillar of the community. I was a woman with a history of stress-related health issues who'd just accused her loving husband and trusted physician of conspiracy to commit murder. Who would believe me? And if they did, if somehow the truth came out, what then? Ethan had resources, connections, legal protections I couldn't match. He could drag out any investigation for years, and all that time, I'd be living with a man who'd already decided I was worth more dead than alive. No. There was only one choice that made sense, one that I'd never considered before, but now seemed inevitable. I had to disappear. The decision came with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, my mind was clear, focused. I wasn't Laura the victim anymore. I was Laura the survivor, and survivors did whatever it took to live. I spent the morning carefully, methodically planning my disappearance. I transferred small amounts of money from our joint accounts to a new account I'd opened months ago for my consulting business, but never used. I gathered my important documents, birth certificate, passport, medical records, and secured them in a waterproof bag. I packed a single backpack with clothes, basic toiletries, and the few pieces of jewelry that were truly mine. Most importantly, I made copies of everything: the recording, the financial documents, the insurance papers. I uploaded them to an encrypted cloud storage account and made backup copies on 2 different flash drives. By noon, I was ready. But first, I had one more call to make. "Nina?" I kept my voice steady as my childhood best friend answered. "It's Laura." I need your help, and I can't explain everything right now, but I'm in trouble. Real trouble. Nina. Caldwell had been my best friend since we were 12, the only person who'd ever truly known me. She'd become an FBI analyst straight out of college, later transitioning to private investigation work. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was Nina. "Where are you?" Her voice went immediately professional, alert. "At home, but not for long." "Nina, I need you to listen carefully and not ask questions until I'm somewhere safe." "Okay, I'm listening." "My husband is trying to kill me." There was a pause, but not the disbelieving silence I'd expected from anyone else. Nina had seen too much in her career to dismiss anything immediately. "How certain are you?" "I have a recording." "Then you need to disappear, tonight. Don't pack much, don't leave a trail, and whatever you do, don't confront him." "Can you get out of the house?" "Yes, but Nina..." "We'll talk when you're safe. Drive north, stay off major highways, pay cash only. I'll meet you somewhere in Oregon. Can you make it that far?" I looked around our kitchen one last time. The hand-painted tiles I'd chosen, the custom cabinets Ethan had surprised me with for our 10th anniversary, the breakfast nook where we'd shared coffee and dreams for so many mornings. "Yes," I said, "I can make it." Because the alternative was dying in this beautiful house, by the hands of a man I'd once loved more than my own life. The Laura Chambers who'd built a career helping people recover from trauma in their own homes was about to become the Laura Chambers who'd recover from the ultimate betrayal by disappearing completely. I left that afternoon while Ethan was still in San Francisco, taking nothing that couldn't fit in my backpack. I disabled the GPS in my car, threw my cell phone in a dumpster 3 towns away, and bought a burner phone from a gas station with cash. As I drove north on Highway 101, watching my old life disappear in the rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. They wanted me dead, but dead women tell no tales. I was about to become very much alive. The Redwood Motel in Crescent City, Oregon, was the kind of place people went to disappear. Faded blue paint, a neon sign that flickered intermittently, and a parking lot cracked with decades of neglect. It was perfect. I'd been driving for 6 hours, stopping only for gas and to use restrooms at busy truck stops where security cameras were more focused on preventing theft than identifying faces. My reflection in the motel's bathroom mirror showed a woman I barely recognized, hair tucked under a baseball cap I'd bought at a gas station, no makeup, wearing clothes that hung loose on my frame. Good. Recognition was the enemy now. The desk clerk barely looked up when I requested a room, paying cash for a week in advance under the name Kate Montero, a combination of my mother's maiden name and my college roommate's surname. It felt strange, but not wrong, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit, but might, with time. My room was on the ground floor, facing the parking lot with a clear view of both entrances. Old habits from my nursing days, when I'd learned to always know where the exits were. The space was sparse but clean. A queen bed with a faded floral comforter, a small table with 2 chairs, and a bathroom that had seen better decades. I sat on the bed and pulled out the burner phone, dialing the number I'd memorized in the car. "It's me," I said when Nina answered. "I'm safe." "Thank God. Where are you?" "Oregon coast. Small place. Very forgettable." "Good. Now tell me everything." I played the recording first, watching the sun set over the Pacific through my window as Nina listened to my husband and our family doctor plot my murder. When it finished, neither of us spoke for a long moment. "Jesus, Laura," Nina finally said. This is beyond what I imagined. It gets worse." I told her about the financial documents, the insurance policies, the debt I'd discovered. "He's been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every time he encouraged me to rest, to not worry about business. He was isolating me. The classic pattern: abusers don't always use their fists. Nina's voice was grim. What about your business? Your clients? I've been handling everything remotely since my collapse anyway. Most of my clients think I'm still recovering at home. I can maintain that fiction for a while. What about Ethan? When's he due back? I checked the time on my phone. He should be getting home in about 2 hours. His flight lands at 6, and it's a 40-minute drive from the airport. He'll notice you're gone immediately? Maybe not. I've been spending most of my time in the sunroom or the guest bedroom. He usually goes straight to his office when he gets home from trips. But by morning... I swallowed hard. By morning, he'll know. Then we need to move fast. I'm already running background checks on Dr. Moreland, and I'll start digging deeper into Ethan's finances. But Laura, I need you to understand something. What? Once he reports you missing, this becomes a whole different game. Are you prepared for that? For everyone you know to think you're gone? I stared out at the darkening ocean, considering. My sister lived in Boston with her own family, consumed with her job and her children. My parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago. My few close friends were mostly other business owners I saw at networking events, people who would express concern but wouldn't lose sleep over my absence. The truth was, somewhere along the way, Ethan had become my entire world. And now that world was a trap. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. All right, here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow, you're going to start building a new identity. Nothing illegal, just flexible. Find somewhere you can work, blend in, establish routines. I'll handle the investigation from this end. Nina, what if nothing? You're alive, Laura. You're smart, you're capable, and you have evidence. We're going to use all of that to destroy them before they even realize you're still breathing. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on the lights. In a few hours, Ethan would arrive home to an empty house. He'd call my name, maybe check the sunroom first, then the guest bedroom. When he found nothing, he'd probably assume I was out getting groceries or visiting the few friends I had left. But as the hours passed and I didn't return, didn't answer my phone, what would he feel? Relief that his problem had solved itself? Worry that his financial salvation had escaped? Or would there be even a flicker of genuine concern for the woman he'd once loved? I didn't want to know the answer to that question. Instead, I focused on practical matters. Tomorrow, I'd need to find work, something that would give me income and cover without drawing attention. I'd need to establish routines, create a life, for Kate Montero that felt real enough to sustain, and I'd need to prepare for the media attention that would inevitably follow. Missing woman, wealthy husband, mysterious disappearance. It would be exactly the kind of story that attracted coverage, especially in our image-conscious community. Let them look. Let Ethan play the grieving husband. Let Dr. Moreland express his concern for his patient's well-being. I'd be watching from the shadows, building my case and my new life simultaneously. My phone buzzed with a text from Nina. Moreland has been questioned twice in the past 3 years about suspicious deaths. Both cases closed due to lack of evidence. Your instincts were right. I stared at the message until the screen went dark, then set the phone aside. How many other women had there been? How many other natural deaths had lined Kent Moreland's pockets? The thought filled me with cold rage, but also determination. This wasn't just about my survival anymore. It was about justice for all the women who hadn't been lucky enough to overhear their own murder being planned. I pulled out my laptop and began documenting everything. The timeline of my marriage's decline, Ethan's behavior changes, every conversation with Dr. Moreland that had seemed caring but now felt sinister. If I was going to disappear, I was going to do it right. And when the time came to reappear, I'd have enough evidence to bury them both. The last thing I did before trying to sleep was search for news from my hometown. Nothing yet. But by tomorrow evening, I expected to see my own face staring back at me from missing person reports. The strange thing was, I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Not the diminished, fragile woman I'd become, but the Laura who'd built a business from scratch, who'd helped countless people navigate their own recoveries. Tomorrow, I'd begin the most important recovery of my life. Learning how to live again after discovering the person you trusted most wanted you dead. The woman in the mirror looked nothing like Laura Chambers. I'd spent my first week in Crescent City transforming myself in small but significant ways. My naturally blonde hair was now a mousy brown, cut short and styled differently. I'd bought drugstore reading glasses that changed the shape of my face, and clothes from the local thrift store that made me look like a woman down on her luck, rather than the wife of a successful CEO. The transformation was more than physical. Kate Montero had a different posture, shoulders slightly hunched, head down, movements careful and economical. She was a woman who'd learned to make herself small, invisible. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was becoming what Ethan had already tried to make me, someone who didn't matter. But unlike the diminished Laura he'd created, Kate was temporary. A persona I could shed when the time was right. The Redwood Motel had become my base of operations, and its owner, Marisol Vega, had become an unexpected ally. She was a woman, in her 50s, with graying black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. When I'd extended my stay for the second week, she'd studied me with the kind of assessment that comes from years of seeing people at their lowest points. "You running from something?" she'd asked bluntly. "Someone," I'd replied without thinking. She'd nodded as if that explained everything. "You need work?" And just like that, Kate Montero had employment. I cleaned rooms, helped with maintenance, handled the front desk during Marisol's breaks. The work was honest, physical, and completely different from anything I'd done before. It was also exactly what I needed: routine, purpose, and the kind of anonymity that comes from being invisible service staff. The pay was modest, but it was legitimate income under my new identity. More importantly, it gave me a reason to be here that had nothing to do with running away from a murder plot. My evenings were spent in my room, laptop open, monitoring the news from Northern California. The story had broken exactly as I'd predicted. "Local woman disappears," followed by increasingly dramatic headlines as days passed without any sign of me. Ethan played his part perfectly. In the televised interviews, he was the picture of devastated husband, hollow-eyed, voice cracking with emotion, pleading for my safe return. He mentioned my recent health scare, my fragile mental state, his fear that I might have harmed myself. "Laura's been struggling since her collapse," he told Channel 7 News, dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. "She blamed herself, thought she was a burden. I should have seen the signs." The performance was flawless. If I hadn't heard him plotting my murder, I might have believed it myself. Dr. Moreland was more subtle in his media presence, but equally effective. He spoke about the challenges of treating patients with stress-related cardiac episodes, the importance of mental health support during recovery. He never mentioned our private conversations, never hinted at anything inappropriate in our doctor-patient relationship. "Mrs. Chambers was making good progress," he told a reporter. "But recovery from a cardiac event is complex. Sometimes patients feel overwhelmed by the changes in their life, the dependence on others. It's not uncommon for them to seek control in destructive ways. They were writing my suicide note for me, creating a narrative that would explain my disappearance and clear the way for Ethan to claim my life insurance. Brilliant, really. If they couldn't kill me directly, they'd kill me symbolically and achieve the same result. But I had one advantage they didn't know about: Nina. Our nightly phone calls had become my lifeline to reality. While the world saw me as a missing woman, possibly dead, Nina knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. "The financial investigation is paying off," she told me during our call on my 10th day in Oregon. "Ethan's deeper in debt than even you discovered. His company's on the verge of bankruptcy, and he's personally liable for most of the loans." "How much deeper?" "Try 12 million. The life insurance in your trust fund wouldn't just make him wealthy, they'd save him from financial ruin." I sat on my bed, absorbing this information. "What about Moreland?" "That's where it gets interesting. He's not just about the money, Laura. He has a gambling addiction, yes, but there's more. I found connections to at least 6 other suspicious deaths over the past 4 years. All wealthy women, all with heart conditions, all patients of his." My blood ran cold. 6? All ruled natural causes, all had substantial life insurance policies, and in 3 cases, the husbands remarried within a year to women who died under similar circumstances shortly after. Jesus, it's a system. A very profitable one. But here's the thing. You're the first one who escaped. You're the first one who can prove what they're doing. I walked to my window, looking out at the Pacific Ocean. The waves were rough tonight, crashing against the rocks with a violence that matched my emotions. How do we prove it? We need more evidence. The recording is good, but a defense attorney could argue it was taken out of context, that you misunderstood what you heard. We need to catch them in the act. What do you mean? Think about it, Laura. As far as they know, you're missing, possibly dead. But they can't collect on the insurance until they have a body or you're declared legally dead. That takes time, usually 7 years, sometimes less if there's evidence of suicide. So they're stuck. Exactly. And desperate people make mistakes. Ethan's already starting to crack under the financial pressure. His company's creditors are getting impatient and the media attention is making investors nervous. I could hear the satisfaction in Nina's voice, and I felt a spark of my own. For the first time since this nightmare began, we weren't just reacting. We were planning. What do you need me to do? Stay invisible for now. Keep building Kate's life, establish your routine, but also start documenting everything you remember about your marriage, your medical treatment, every interaction with Moreland. We're going to need a complete timeline when this goes to trial. When, not if. When, Nina said firmly. These bastards are going down, Laura. All of them. After we hung up, I pulled out the journal I'd started keeping. What had begun as a way to process my trauma had become something more important, a record of systematic abuse disguised as love and care. I wrote about the gradual isolation, the way Ethan had slowly taken control of our finances, our social life, even my medical care. I wrote about the subtle ways he'd undermined my confidence, making me dependent on him for everything from dinner plans to prescription refills. I wrote about Dr. Moreland's bedside manner, the way he'd touched my shoulder during examinations, the gentle voice he'd used to explain why I needed to reduce my activities, limit my stress, trust my husband to handle the complicated aspects of my recovery. They'd been grooming me for months, maybe years, preparing me to be the perfect victim, isolated, dependent, and ultimately disposable. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. The Laura Chambers they'd been manipulating was real. The woman who'd loved her husband, trusted her doctor, and wanted nothing more than to recover and return to her normal life. But that woman had also been an emergency room nurse, trained to spot the signs of abuse, domestic violence, and medical malpractice. She'd built a successful business helping people navigate medical crises, advocating for patients who couldn't advocate for themselves. She'd spent years teaching people to trust their instincts, to speak up when something felt wrong, to fight for their own lives. They'd forgotten that underneath the fragile wife and compliant patient was a woman who'd spent her career saving lives. Now she was going to save her own. I closed the journal and prepared for bed, thinking about tomorrow's routine. I'd clean rooms, handle the front desk, help Marisol with whatever needed doing. I'd be invisible, forgettable Kate Montero. But in the evenings, I'd continue building the case that would destroy the men who'd tried to erase me. 2 weeks ago, I'd been a woman running for her life. Now I was a woman planning her return from the dead. And when Laura Chambers finally resurged, she was going to bring hell with her. Detective Rami Sutter had seen enough missing person cases to know when something didn't add up, and everything about Ethan Chambers screamed wrong notes. I watched the interview from my motel room, 3 weeks into my new life as Kate Montero. The detective was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with graying temples and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. He sat across from my husband in our living room, the same room where I'd once felt safe, where we'd planned vacations and discussed dreams that now felt like elaborate lies. "Mr. Chambers," Detective Sutter was saying, "walk me through the last conversation you had with your wife." Ethan's performance was pitch perfect. He sat forward slightly, hands clasped, the picture of a concerned husband trying to be helpful. "It was the morning I left for San Francisco. Laura was. She'd been having a difficult time since her collapse. The recovery was harder than either of us expected." Difficult how? Emotionally. She'd always been so independent, and suddenly, she needed help with everything. Simple tasks exhausted her, she felt like. Ethan paused, his voice catching just slightly. She felt like a burden. I nearly threw my laptop across the room. The manipulation was breathtaking, taking my legitimate frustration with my limitations and twisting it into evidence of suicidal ideation. "Did she ever express thoughts of self-harm?" Sutter asked. "Not directly, but she'd make comments about how much easier things would be if she wasn't around, how tired she was of being helpless. Dr. Moreland and I were both concerned about her mental state." "Dr. Moreland treated your wife?" "For 7 years. He's been incredible throughout this whole ordeal. House calls during her recovery, adjusting her medications, coordinating with specialists. He's as worried as I am." The camera cut to file footage of Dr. Moreland entering his practice. Even watching him on screen made my skin crawl. The man who'd held my hand during recovery, who'd spoken so gently about the importance of rest and reducing stress, who'd been planning the perfect way to stop my heart. My burner phone buzzed with a text from Nina. Watching the same interview. "Note how Chambers keeps mentioning financial stress. Setting up motive for suicide." She was right. Throughout the 20-minute interview, Ethan had skillfully woven in references to our financial challenges. The impact of my medical bills, my inability to work, the strain on our resources. None of it was true. We had excellent insurance and substantial savings, but it painted a picture of a woman who might feel guilty about being a burden. The interview concluded with Ethan making a direct appeal to me, as if I might be watching. "Laura, if you're out there, please come home. Whatever you're going through, we can face it together. You're not alone, and you're not a burden. I love you, and I just want you safe." The tears in his eyes looked real. For a moment, watching him, I almost forgot what I knew. Almost remembered. The man I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago, before the money troubles, before the desperation, before he'd decided I was worth more dead than alive. But then I looked at the framed photo on my nightstand, a picture Marisol had helped me print from my phone. It showed me with Nina from our college days, both of us laughing at something long forgotten. The woman in that photo was confident, alive, unafraid. She'd been buried somewhere inside the compliant wife Ethan had created, but she wasn't dead. Not yet. I called Nina immediately after the interview ended. "Did you see?" "Every manipulative second of it," she interrupted. "But here's what's interesting. Detective Sutter isn't buying it completely." "What makes you say that?" Body language mostly. He's asking the right questions, but he's also watching Chambers very carefully. And did you notice he didn't ask about the financial situation directly? That suggests he's already looked into it. You think he knows about Ethan's debts? I think he's starting to. I made some discreet inquiries. Sutter has a reputation for being thorough. He doesn't close cases just because they look obvious. That was reassuring, but I couldn't rely on Detective Sutter's instincts to save me. I needed to take control of my own narrative. Nina, I want to stage my death. There was a long pause. What do you mean? I mean, I want them to find evidence that Laura Chambers is dead. Not missing, not hiding. Dead. It's the only way to trigger their next move. Laura, that's incredibly dangerous. If you're legally declared dead, I'm already dead to everyone who matters. But if they think they've won, if they think they can collect the insurance money, they'll get careless. And that's when we catch them. Nina was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she spoke. What did you have in mind? I looked out my window at the rough Pacific waters, the jagged rocks where waves crashed with violent force. There's a hiking trail about 20 miles north of here. Popular with tourists, lots of foot traffic, but also dangerous. People have fallen before. You want to fake a hiking accident. I want to give them a body of evidence without a body. Some personal items, maybe some blood. I still have medical supplies from my recovery. Make it look like I fell, got swept out to sea. That's actually not a terrible plan. But the timing has to be perfect. What do you mean? We need to coordinate it with the investigation. Let Sutter dig a little deeper first. Start asking the questions that make Chambers and Moreland nervous. Then, when they're feeling the pressure, you disappear completely. They'll be so relieved that their problem is solved, they won't look too closely at the details. I spent the next week preparing. I researched the hiking trail, Devil's Punch Bowl, appropriately named, and learned its patterns. Early morning hikers were rare, but afternoon crowds were common. The perfect time would be late morning, when someone would find evidence of my presence, but no witnesses would have seen me actually arrive. I also began saying goodbye to the life I'd built as Kate Montero, though I couldn't tell Marisol the real reason. You're leaving, she said one evening as I finished cleaning the last room. It wasn't a question. How did you know? You've got that look. Same one I had when I left my ex-husband. She studied me with those sharp eyes. Whatever you're running from, you think you've found a way to stop running. Something like that. Be careful, Micha. Sometimes the only way to stop running is to turn around and fight, but sometimes fighting gets you killed. That night, Nina called with an update that changed everything. Moreland's been arrested, she said without preamble. What? For what? Insurance fraud, but not related to you. Remember I told you about other suspicious deaths? Well, Detective Sutter wasn't the only one asking questions. The State Insurance Commission has been building a case, and they finally had enough evidence to move. I felt a surge of vindication, mixed with fear. What does this mean for us? It means our timeline just accelerated. Moreland's going to be under intense scrutiny now. If he's smart, he'll try to cut a deal, which means potentially exposing Chambers. And if he's not smart? Then Chambers might decide he's a liability. The implications hit me immediately. If Ethan felt cornered, if he thought Dr. Moreland might expose their conspiracy, he might do something desperate. And desperate men, who'd already planned one murder, wouldn't hesitate to plan another. I need to disappear tomorrow, I said. Are you sure you're ready? I looked around my motel room, the place that had been my sanctuary for 3 weeks, where I'd transformed. From victim to survivor. Tomorrow I'd transform again, from survivor to ghost. I'm ready. The next morning, I executed my plan with the precision of a surgical procedure. I drove to Devil's Punch Bowl before dawn, hiked to the most dangerous overlook, and carefully staged the scene. My jacket, torn and stained with my own blood from a carefully inflicted cut on my arm. My hiking boots, positioned as if I'd slipped on the wet rocks. My backpack, contents scattered by the wind. But the crucial evidence was more subtle. Strands of my hair caught on a jagged rock, a piece of my shirt on a branch below the cliff face, and most importantly, my wedding ring, positioned where the tide would have washed it ashore. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I left before the sun was fully up, taking nothing but the clothes on my back and the cash I'd saved from my work at the motel. By the time the first hikers found the evidence, I was already in a small coastal town 50 miles north, buying a bus ticket to Portland under yet another assumed name. As the bus pulled away from the coast, I watched the ocean disappear behind rolling hills. Somewhere back there, search and rescue teams would soon be combing the waters for my body. News crews would return to interview my grieving husband. Dr. Moreland would offer his condolences from his jail cell, and Detective Sutter would have to decide whether to believe that a woman who'd survived a murder plot had simply given up and jumped off a cliff. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about Marisol finding my room empty, my few possessions left behind. She'd understand eventually. She'd know I hadn't given up. I'd just changed tactics. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Nina's voice was tight with emotion. They found the scene. It's all over the news. And Ethan's playing the devastated widower perfectly. But Laura. Detective Sutter looked directly into the camera and said this was still an active investigation. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Maybe I had an ally after all. "Where are you now?" Nina asked. "Heading north. I'll call you when I get settled." "What's the plan?" I watched the Oregon countryside roll past the bus window, forests, and farmland, small towns where a woman could disappear completely, or where she could emerge as someone entirely new. "I'm going to let them think they've won," I said, "and then I'm going to destroy them. Because Laura Chambers might be dead, but her story was just beginning." The obituary appeared in the Northern California Chronicle 3 days after the accident at Devil's Punch Bowl. I read it on my laptop in a small cafe in Portland, sipping coffee and marveling at how thoroughly Ethan had erased me. Laura Elizabeth Chambers, 43, beloved wife and successful home health consultant, was presumed dead following a tragic accident at Devil's Punch Bowl State Natural Area. Mrs. Chambers, who had been struggling with depression following a recent cardiac episode, is survived by her devoted husband, Ethan Chambers, CEO of Prometheus Biotech. The rest was a carefully crafted fiction: my battle with mental health issues, my difficulty adjusting to life after illness, my tragic decision to end her suffering. There was no mention of my successful business, my independence before, the marriage, or the woman I'd been before I became Mrs. Ethan Chambers. But what struck me most was the photograph they'd chosen. It wasn't from our wedding or from any of the happy moments we'd shared. Instead, it was a picture from a company event last year, taken just weeks after my collapse. In it, I looked pale, diminished, clinging to Ethan's arm like a woman who couldn't stand on her own. It was perfect for his narrative, and it made me furious. My phone buzzed with a text from Nina. "Memorial service tomorrow. Are you watching the news?" I switched to a local news stream and found the coverage immediately. The story had captured public attention in a way that surprised me. Probably because of Ethan's prominence in the biotech industry and the dramatic nature of my supposed suicide. The reporter stood outside our house, the camera capturing the pristine landscape and elegant architecture. Friends and colleagues described the Chambers marriage as loving and supportive, making Laura's tragic decision even more shocking to those who knew the couple. The segment included interviews with neighbors, business associates, and Dr. Moreland, speaking by phone from jail. His voice was grave, professional, tinged with what sounded like genuine regret. Mrs. Chambers was a remarkable woman who faced her health challenges with courage, he said, but recovery from a cardiac episode is complex, involving not just physical healing but emotional adjustment. Sometimes the psychological burden becomes overwhelming. I wanted to reach through the screen and strangle him. Even from jail, he was still playing his part in the narrative they'd constructed. But then something unexpected happened. The reporter mentioned that Detective Sutter was continuing his investigation despite the apparent suicide. While the evidence at Devil's Punch Bowl strongly suggests Mrs. Chambers took her own life, the reporter said, Detective Sutter has stated that he won't close the case until all questions have been answered. The camera cut to file footage of Sutter. Outside the police station, Mrs. Chambers was reported missing under circumstances that raised questions, he said carefully. Until we have definitive answers about what happened to her, this remains an active investigation. I felt a surge of hope. Sutter wasn't buying the suicide story completely. He was still digging, still asking questions that made Ethan and Moreland nervous. My phone rang. Nina's voice was tight with excitement. Are you watching this? The news? Yes. Sutter's not giving up. That's not what I'm calling about. Laura, I found something. Something big. I moved to a quieter corner of the cafe. What? I've been digging deeper into Moreland's financial records since his arrest, following the money trail from his gambling debts, looking for patterns. And I found a connection I didn't expect. What kind of connection? Ethan isn't just Moreland's co-conspirator. He's been financing the whole operation. I nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean? Remember how I told you about the other suspicious deaths? The other wealthy women who died under Moreland's care? Well, those weren't random victims. Ethan identified them, researched their financial situations, and in some cases, he was the one who introduced their husbands to the scheme. The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. I stepped outside into the Portland drizzle. He's done this before? At least 6 times that I can document. Maybe more. Ethan would identify financially vulnerable couples where the wife had significant assets. He'd introduce the husband to Dr. Moreland, supposedly as a friend seeking the best medical care. Moreland would become their family physician, and within 6 months to a year, the wife would die of natural causes. And the husbands? Got rich, paid Ethan a percentage of the life insurance proceeds, used their newfound wealth to invest in Prometheus Biotech. It's been a self-sustaining cycle, murder for profit, with the profits funding more murders. I leaned against a brick wall, trying to process this information. My husband wasn't just a desperate man who'd decided to kill me for money. He was a serial killer who'd turned murder into a business model. How long has this been going on? At least 4 years. Maybe longer. That's just as far back as I can trace the financial records. Laura, this isn't about his company's debt anymore. The debt was just what made him desperate enough to target you directly instead of finding another couple to manipulate. I thought about all the dinner parties we'd hosted, all the business associates Ethan had introduced me to over the years. How many of those men had been shopping for a doctor who would help them murder their wives? How many women had I smiled at, chatted with, never knowing they'd be dead within months? There's more, Nina continued. I think Moreland is going to flip. His lawyer contacted the FBI this morning. He wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? Information about the conspiracy in exchange for reduced charges. The FBI is apparently very interested in what he has to say about multiple homicides disguised as medical malpractice. This changed everything. If Moreland exposed the entire network, Ethan wouldn't just be facing charges for my attempted murder. He'd be looking at multiple counts of conspiracy to commit homicide, racketeering, maybe even federal charges if the scheme crossed state lines. But it also made him more dangerous. A man facing life in prison had nothing left to lose. Nina, I think I need to come forward. If Moreland's talking, not yet. Her voice was firm. Right now, you're safer dead. Let them think their plan worked. Let Ethan collect the insurance money, get comfortable, maybe get careless. If you resurface too soon, before we have ironclad evidence, he might find a way to discredit you or worse. How much worse can it get? He could claim you faked your own death to frame him, that you're mentally unstable, that the stress of your illness caused a breakdown. Without more evidence, it becomes your word against his, and you're a woman who's been legally declared dead. She was right, but the waiting was agony. Watching my memorial service streamed online, seeing Ethan play the grieving widower while I hid in a Portland coffee shop like a fugitive from my own life. The service was held at St. Mark's Episcopal, where we'd been married 15 years ago. Ethan had chosen everything perfectly: tasteful flowers, classical music, a guest list that included all the right people from our social circle. He spoke beautifully about our life together, his voice breaking as he described my struggle with depression and his regret that he hadn't seen the signs of my final decision. He thanked Dr. Moreland for his care during my recovery, despite the doctor's current legal troubles. He even managed to work in a subtle plea for mental health awareness and suicide prevention. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, and everyone in attendance seemed genuinely moved by his grief. But I noticed something the mourners couldn't see from their pews. When Ethan thought no one was looking, when the camera wasn't focused on him, his expression changed. The grief disappeared, replaced by something that looked like relief. That evening, I called Nina from my hotel room. I saw the service. His performance was flawless. But Laura, there's something else. I've been monitoring Ethan's communications, and he's already started the insurance claim process. How is that possible? Don't they need a body? Not always. If there's sufficient evidence of death and no reasonable possibility of survival, they can process the claim. The evidence at Devil's Punch Bowl, combined with your presumed mental state and the witness testimony about your depression, might be enough. How long before he gets the money? Probably 6 to 8 weeks. But here's the interesting part. He's also been quietly liquidating other assets, selling stocks, cashing out retirement accounts, moving money offshore. It's like he's preparing to disappear. The implication was clear. Once Ethan collected my life insurance, he planned to vanish before anyone could connect him to the larger conspiracy. He'd built himself an exit strategy, probably a new identity in a country without extradition treaties. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed I was actually dead. Nina, I want to go back. Back where? Home. Not to confront him, but to see what he's doing, how he's living in the house we shared. I need to understand what I'm really up against. That's incredibly dangerous. If he sees you, he won't. I'm good at being invisible now. I looked at my reflection in the hotel mirror, short brown hair, glasses, clothes that made me forgettable. I'm not the woman he married anymore. I'm someone else entirely. Laura. Kate, I corrected. Laura Chambers is dead, remember? But Kate Montero is very much alive, and she's going hunting. The next morning, I boarded a bus back to Northern California. It was time to visit my own grave and see what my resurrection might look like, because if Ethan thought he'd gotten away with murder, I was about to prove him very, very wrong. The house looked different in the moonlight. Smaller somehow, as if my absence had diminished it. I crouched behind the oak tree at the corner of our property, the same tree I'd once hung Christmas lights on, where Ethan and I had carved our initials during our 2nd year of marriage. Now it felt like visiting a mausoleum. I'd been watching for 3 hours, learning the new rhythms of a house that was no longer mine. Ethan had changed the security system. I could see the new cameras mounted at different angles, covering approaches that the old system had missed. He'd also installed motion sensors in the garden, their red lights blinking like predatory eyes. But I knew this property better than any security consultant. I'd designed the landscaping, chosen every plant, planned every pathway. I knew where the blind spots were, which areas the sensors couldn't reach. More importantly, I knew Ethan's habits. He'd always been a creature of routine, and grief, real or performed, hadn't changed that. At 10:47 p.m., exactly as he had for years, he turned off the downstairs lights and headed upstairs to our bedroom. The bedroom I'd been exiled from during my recovery. The bedroom where he'd probably already boxed up my clothes, erased the last traces of my presence. I waited another hour before moving, using the old gardener's path that ran along the back fence. The motion sensors were positioned to catch someone approaching the house directly, but this route would keep me in the shadows of the larger shrubs. My destination wasn't the house itself. That would be too risky. Instead, I headed for Ethan's home office, housed in a converted greenhouse at the back of the property. He'd always kept his most sensitive business documents there, away from the main house, in a space he considered completely private. The office had its own security system, but it was older, less sophisticated. And I still remembered the code. Ethan had used our anniversary date for everything, even after our marriage started falling apart. The numbers glowed green as I entered them. EO61409. The system disarmed with a soft beep. Inside, the office looked exactly as it had when I was alive. Same leather chair, same massive desk, same wall of awards and certificates celebrating Ethan's business success. But now I saw it differently. This wasn't just the workspace of a successful CEO, it was the command center of a serial killer. I pulled out the small LED flashlight I'd bought and began searching. The filing cabinets were locked, but I knew where Ethan hid the key, inside a hollowed-out business book that he thought was cleverly concealed. The files I found made my blood run cold. There were dossiers on dozens of couples, organized alphabetically like a catalog. Each folder contained financial records, medical histories, insurance information, and handwritten notes in Ethan's precise script. The notes detailed everything from marital problems to health issues to spending habits. But it was the subcategory that made me nauseous. Potential candidates. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking as I documented the systematic planning that had gone into multiple murders. There were folders for the 6 women Nina had identified, but also preliminary files on at least 20 others, including couples I recognized from our social circle. One folder was thicker than the others, marked simply LC, my own file. Inside, I found detailed notes going back 3 years, long before my cardiac episode, long before I'd become the burden Ethan claimed I'd become. He'd been planning my death since 2021, carefully documenting my routines, my health patterns, my relationships. There were photocopies of my medical records, somehow obtained without my knowledge, insurance documents I'd never seen, and most chilling of all, a timeline titled Implementation Strategy that laid out exactly how he planned to isolate me, make me dependent, and ultimately eliminate me. My cardiac episode hadn't been the trigger for his plan. It had been the opportunity he'd been waiting for. I was photographing the last pages when I heard a sound that made my blood freeze, the back door of the main house opening. I switched off my flashlight and crouched behind the desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the office window, I could see a figure moving across the lawn with a flashlight of their own. Ethan, wearing a bathrobe and slippers, was making his nightly rounds. I'd forgotten about this habit. Ever since a break-in at a neighbor's house 2 years ago, Ethan had started doing a security walk before bed, checking the perimeter of the property. I'd always found it endearing, My protective husband making sure we were safe. Now I realized he'd probably been checking for signs that his other victims were still alive, still a threat to his carefully constructed schemes. The beam of his flashlight swept across the greenhouse windows as he approached. I pressed myself against the floor behind the desk, barely breathing. If he came inside, if he found me here with his murder files, I'd become another suicide within hours. The T.E. footsteps stopped directly outside the office door. I heard the soft beep of the security system being checked, then the rattle of the door handle. Locked. Ethan tried the handle again, then moved on. I waited until his footsteps faded completely before risking a look. He was walking back toward the house, apparently satisfied that his secrets were secure. I gave him another 10 minutes, then quickly finished photographing the files and returned everything to its original position. The key went back into the hollowed book, the filing. Cabinets were relocked, and the security system was reactivated. But as I prepared to leave, I spotted something I'd missed earlier. A laptop computer hidden in the bottom drawer of Ethan's desk. It was an older model, one I'd never seen him use. A device meant to be invisible, untraceable. I powered it on, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I searched for anything that might be useful. What I found exceeded my worst expectations. The laptop contained detailed correspondence with Dr. Moreland and at least 6 other men, all husbands of the women who'd died. The emails were coded, but the meaning was clear. Ethan wasn't just facilitating murders for money. He was running a network, a business that matched desperate husbands with corrupt medical professionals. The emails went back years, detailing payments, methods, cover stories. There were discussions of expansion into other states, recruitment of additional doctors, even talk of franchising the operation. But the most recent emails were different, panicked, desperate. Dr. Moreland's arrest had terrified the entire network. Several participants were demanding their money back, threatening to expose the operation if they were arrested. Others were planning to disappear entirely, liquidating assets and fleeing the country. Ethan was losing control of his empire, and the emails showed he was becoming increasingly unstable. In his most recent message, sent just hours ago, he'd written, "The Chamber's problem has been resolved permanently. Elsie is gone, no body will ever be found, and the insurance proceeds will fund new operations in jurisdictions beyond U.S. law enforcement. Reach. Anyone who compromises this transition will be dealt with accordingly." The threat was clear. Anyone who endangered Ethan's escape plan would end up like his problem wife. I uploaded everything to an encrypted cloud storage account, then carefully shut down the laptop and returned it to its hiding place. By the time I slipped back through the garden and reached my rental car 3 blocks away, I had enough evidence to destroy not just Ethan and Dr. Moreland, but an entire network of killers. But I also knew that I was now in more danger than ever. Ethan thought he'd killed me once. If he discovered I was still alive, he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. I drove to an all-night diner and called Nina from the parking lot. "Jesus Christ, Laura. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I've been visiting my own wake. Nina, this is bigger than we thought. Much bigger." Told her about the files, the laptop, the network of conspirators. As I spoke, I could hear her typing furiously, probably cross-referencing the names I was giving her with her own research. "This is it," she said when I finished. "This is enough to take down the entire operation. But Laura, you need to come in now. You need to turn this evidence over to the FBI." "Not yet. There's one more thing I need to do." "What?" I looked at my reflection in the car's side mirror. Kate Montero, the invisible woman who'd been gathering evidence while the world mourned Laura Chambers. "I need to attend my own funeral," I said. "And then I need to come back from the dead." Because Laura Chambers had been dead long enough. It was time for her resurrection. And when she returned, she was bringing justice with her. The first crack in Ethan's facade appeared on Channel 7's morning news, exactly 6 weeks after my supposed death. I watched from another anonymous coffee shop, this one in Sacramento, as investigative reporter Jessica Chen stood outside the Mao FBI field office with a story that would change everything. Federal agents have arrested 3 additional suspects in what sources describe as a multi-state conspiracy involving insurance fraud and suspicious deaths, Chen reported. The arrests stem from information provided by Dr. Kent Moreland, who is cooperating with authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. The camera cut to file footage of handcuffed men being led into federal custody. I recognized 2 of them from Ethan's files: Gerald Morrison, whose wife had died of a heart attack while jogging, and David Kim, who'd lost his spouse to a medication interaction just months after their 10th anniversary. But it was the 3rd man who made my blood run cold. Robert Hayes, Ethan's business partner and closest friend. The man who'd been best man at our wedding, who'd spent countless evenings at our dinner table, who'd known me for over a decade. He'd been part of the conspiracy all along. My phone buzzed with a call from Nina. "Are you watching this?" "Every word." "How much do they know?" "More than we hoped, less than we need. Moreland's giving them the financial structure, the payment methods, the recruitment process. But he doesn't know about the laptop you found, and he doesn't have direct evidence of Ethan's role as the organizer." "What about Robert?" "That's where it gets interesting. Hayes is claiming he was just a financial consultant, that he didn't know what the payments were really for. His lawyer's already hinting at a plea deal." I felt a surge of frustration. They're all going to turn on each other and minimize their involvement. Maybe, but here's the thing. Ethan doesn't know how much they're revealing. He's running scared, making mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Yesterday, he tried to access that hidden laptop from his office remotely. My contact at the FBI flagged the digital signature. They're watching him now, Laura. They just don't have enough evidence to arrest him yet. I closed my laptop and walked outside, needing fresh air to process this information. After weeks of hiding, of watching, my husband played the grieving widower while planning his escape. The walls were finally closing in on him. But I also knew Ethan better than the FBI did. He was brilliant, methodical, and utterly ruthless when cornered. He wouldn't go down without a fight, and he had resources they didn't know about. "Nina, I need to know about his exit strategy. The offshore accounts, the new identity. How advanced is his planning?" "According to the financial records I've tracked, very advanced. He's been moving money for months, not just since your death. I think he's been planning to disappear for a while, probably when the investigation got too close." So my supposed suicide just accelerated his timeline. Exactly. The insurance money was supposed to be his final payday before vanishing. I thought about the emails I'd found on the hidden laptop, the panic in his communications with the other conspirators. What happens when the insurance company finds out about the federal investigation? Won't they freeze the claim? They already have. As of this morning, all payouts related to any of the victims are on hold pending the investigation. That changed everything. Ethan was trapped. No insurance money, no exit strategy, and federal agents watching his every move. A desperate man with nothing left to lose. My phone rang again. Unknown number. "Hello? Laura?" The voice was shaky, frightened. "Laura, is this really you?" My blood turned to ice. "Marisol. Who is this? Don't lie to me, mija. I saw the news about your husband, about the other men. I know you're alive." I closed my eyes, leaning against a building for support. "Marisol, how did you get this number?" That FBI agent, the woman who came asking questions about Kate Montero. She left her card, told me to call if I remembered anything else about you. So I called her, told her you weren't the kind of woman who gives up. "Nina, Of course, Nina would have thought to interview Marisol, would have recognized the connection between Kate Montero and Laura Chambers. What did you tell her? The truth. That Kate was running from someone dangerous, that she was scared but not broken. That she worked harder than anyone I've ever met, like she was trying to earn the right to exist. Tears stung my eyes. In 3 weeks at the Redwood Motel, Marisol had seen me more clearly than my husband had in 15 years of marriage. Are you safe? She asked. I'm trying to be. He knows, doesn't he? Your husband. He knows you're alive. The question hit me like a physical blow. What makes you say that? Because he came here 3 days ago, asking questions about Kate Montero, showing your picture around town. He told people he was a private investigator hired by your family, looking for closure. My legs nearly gave out. Ethan had found the connection to the Redwood Motel. He was hunting me, and he was getting close. Marisol, did you... I told him Kate left the morning after they found your things at that cliff. Said she seemed upset about something she saw on the news, packed up and headed north. I don't think he believed me, but I don't think he knows for sure. Thank you. Laura, be careful. That man, he's got dead eyes. Like a shark. Whatever. You're planning. Don't underestimate him. After we hung up, I called Nina immediately. He's looking for me, I said without preamble. Ethan's been in Oregon, tracking Kate Montero. Shit, how much does he know? Enough to be dangerous. Marisol thinks he suspects I'm alive, but he doesn't have proof. We need to move fast. The FBI? No. The word came out harder than I intended. Not yet. If I surface now, before they have ironclad evidence against him, he'll disappear. Use his resources, his connections, his backup plans. He'll become someone else and start over. Laura, if he knows you're alive, then I have an advantage he doesn't expect. He thinks he's hunting a victim. But I'm not a victim anymore. Nina, I'm a predator. I spent the rest of the day planning my next move. Ethan was looking for Kate Montero, which meant he still didn't know exactly where I was or what identity I was using now. But he was close enough that I needed to be smarter, more careful. More importantly, I needed to force his hand. That evening, I checked into a cheap motel outside San Francisco and began implementing a plan that would either expose Ethan completely or get me killed. I created a new email account and sent a message to Ethan's personal address. Not the business account the FBI was probably monitoring, but the private one he'd used for family correspondence. Mr. Chambers, I have information about your wife that you need to hear. Meet me tomorrow at Pier 39, 3 p.m., near the Sea Lions. Come alone, or the FBI gets everything I know about Laura's real fate. A concerned citizen. It was deliberately vague, designed to prey on his paranoia while offering just enough hope to draw him out. If he thought someone had evidence of my survival, he'd have to respond. The question was whether he'd come to pay for silence or to ensure it permanently. I spent the night preparing for both possibilities. The next morning brought news that changed the entire game. Jessica Chen was back on Channel 7 with a breaking report that made my carefully laid trap suddenly seem inadequate. Federal authorities have issued an arrest warrant for Ethan Chambers, CEO of Prometheus Biotech, in connection with a conspiracy that may have resulted in the deaths of at least 8 women over the past 4 years. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Sources close to the investigation say that financial records obtained from cooperating witnesses show Chambers not only facilitated the murders, but personally profited from each death. The FBI is asking for the public's assistance in locating Chambers, who failed to appear for questioning yesterday and is believed to have fled the area. Failed to appear, fled the area. I grabbed my phone and called Nina. Did you see? He's gone, she interrupted. Sometime between Monday night and Tuesday morning, he cleaned out his remaining accounts and disappeared. His car was found at SFO, but there's no record of him boarding any flights under his real name. So he had a backup identity ready. Multiple identities, probably. Laura, this changes everything. He's not going to show up at Pier 39. He's already running. I felt a surge of frustration so intense it was almost physical. After weeks of careful planning, of gathering evidence and building a case, Ethan had simply vanished. He'd escaped justice, escaped consequences, escaped everything. But then I realized something that made me smile for the first time in days. Nina, he may be running, but he can't run forever. And more importantly, he thinks I'm still dead. What do you mean? His escape plan was based on the assumption that his biggest threat was the FBI investigation. But if he knew I was alive, knew I had evidence from his private files, would he have run the same way? Probably not. He would have tried to eliminate the threat first. Exactly. Which means wherever he is, whatever identity he's using, he still believes his biggest secret is safe. He still thinks Laura Chambers died at Devil's Punch Bowl. I walked to the window of my motel room, looking out at the San Francisco skyline where my husband had built his biotech empire and his murder network. It's time, Nina. Time for what? Time for Laura Chambers to rise from the dead. The next morning, I drove to the FBI field office in San Francisco and walked through the front door for the first time in 2 months. My name is Laura Chambers, I told the receptionist, and I'd like to report my own murder. The FBI interview room was nothing like the interrogation scenes from television. Beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and a metal table that reflected my nervous energy back at me. I sat across from Special Agent Sarah Martinez and Detective Rami Sutter, a stack of evidence between us that represented 2 months of my life, in hiding. Mrs. Chambers, Agent Martinez began, her voice carefully neutral. Before we discuss the evidence you've brought us, I need to understand exactly how you're alive when the entire state of California believes you committed suicide. I'd rehearsed this moment for weeks, but sitting here under the harsh lights, facing the skeptical eyes of law enforcement, the words felt inadequate. I overheard my husband planning to murder me, I said simply. So I disappeared before he could do it. Detective Sutter leaned forward. The recording you provided? Walk me through how you obtained it. I explained about the baby monitor, the late-night conversation, my decision to record what I was hearing. As I spoke, I watched their faces, trying to gauge whether they believed or thought I was an unstable woman who'd faked her own death for attention. The evidence you gathered from your husband's office, Agent Martinez said. How did you access his computer without his knowledge? I broke into my own house. The admission felt strange. I knew his security patterns, his hiding places. I photographed everything I could find. Including communications with other conspirators? Including a complete record of the murder network he'd been running for years. Agent Martinez and Detective Sutter exchanged glances. I could see them weighing my story against the evidence, trying to determine if I was credible or delusional. Mrs. Chambers, Sutter said finally, why didn't you come to us immediately? Why stage your own death instead of reporting what you'd heard? It was the question I'd dreaded most, because I was terrified no one would believe me. My husband is respected, successful, charming. Dr. Moreland was our trusted family physician. I was a woman with a recent cardiac episode who'd been struggling with recovery. Who would have taken my word against theirs? You had the recording, a recording that could have been taken out of context, misinterpreted, dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a sick woman. And even if you'd believed me, how long would an investigation have taken? Weeks? Months? I would have been living with a man who'd already decided I was worth more dead than alive. The room fell silent. Finally, Agent Martinez spoke. The evidence you've provided is substantial, Mrs. Chambers. It corroborates information we've obtained from other sources and fills in significant gaps in our understanding of the conspiracy. But I have to ask, are you prepared for what comes next? What do you mean? Your husband has been missing for 4 days. We believe he's fled the country using false identification. If we're going to catch him, we need your help. Detective Sutter pulled out a tablet and showed me a surveillance photo from SFO. A man in a baseball cap and sunglasses, but unmistakably Ethan. This was taken at the International Terminal Tuesday morning. He used identification in the name Michael Richardson, an identity he'd apparently been building for months. The trail goes cold after this. I studied the photo, seeing the man I'd once loved reduced to a fugitive in an airport security camera. Where do you think he went? Somewhere without extradition treaties, probably. But here's the thing. He can't access his hidden assets from just anywhere. The offshore accounts you documented require specific authentication procedures, biometric verification in some cases. He'll have to surface eventually. And when he does? We'll be waiting. But Mrs. Chambers, there's something else. Something that makes your situation more complicated. Agent Martinez slid another file across the table. We've been monitoring communications from the other conspirators, the ones who are cooperating with our investigation. Some of them suspect you might still be alive. My blood ran cold. How? Your disappearance was too convenient, too perfectly timed. Some of them think your husband might have warned you somehow, that you both planned to fake your death and escape together. That's insane. I'm here cooperating with you. We know that, but they don't. And if word gets back to your, husband that some of his former associates suspect you're alive. The implication was clear. Ethan would know his greatest secret, my survival, was potentially compromised. He'd become even more dangerous, more desperate. What do you need me to do? Detective Sutter leaned back in his chair. We want you to help us draw him out. Make contact, let him know you're alive, arrange a meeting. You want me to be bait. We want you to be the reason he stops running, Agent Martinez corrected. Right now, he thinks he's safe. The investigation is focused on his co-conspirators. And his biggest threat, you, is supposedly dead. But if he learns you're alive, with evidence that could destroy him, he'll come for me. We believe so, and when he does, we'll be ready. I stared at the evidence spread across the table. Photos of Ethan's files, transcripts of the recording that had started this nightmare, financial records that documented years of systematic murder. Everything I'd gathered while living as a ghost in my own life. There's something else you should know, I said finally. My husband isn't just running from the FBI. He's running from the other conspirators, too. Some of them were threatening him before he disappeared, demanding their money back, talking about exposing the operation if they got arrested. Which ones? I told them about the emails I'd found, the panic in Ethan's communications, the sense that his network was collapsing around him. That actually works in our favor, Agent Martinez said. A man being hunted by both law enforcement and former criminal associates is more likely to make mistakes. Or more likely to be extremely dangerous when cornered. We'll have protection protocols in place, Mrs. Chambers. You won't be alone when you make contact. But even as they outlined their plan, the secure communication methods, the surveillance teams, the backup protocols, I knew that if Ethan truly believed I threatened his freedom, no amount of FBI protection would keep me completely safe. The Chihuahua, man who'd once promised to love me in sickness and in health, had already tried to murder me once. Given a second chance, he wouldn't hesitate to finish the job. 2 days later, I sent the message that would bring my husband out of hiding. Ethan, it's me. I know you think I'm dead, but I'm very much alive. I have everything, the files, the laptop, the evidence of what you've been doing. We need to talk. Alone. You know where to find me. Laura. I sent it to an encrypted email, address that Nina had traced to one of his hidden accounts. an address he'd used for the most sensitive communications with his network. Then I waited. The FBI had set up surveillance in a rental house across from our old home, where I was staying under heavy protection. If Ethan was going to come for me, Agent Martinez believed he'd come there, to the place where our marriage had lived and died, where he'd planned my murder. The response came 18 hours later, from a different encrypted account. Meet me at the coast. Tomorrow, midnight. Deer Creek Beach, North Parking Area. Come alone, or I disappear forever and you spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. And I stared at the message, my hands trembling slightly. Deer Creek Beach was where we'd had our first date 15 years ago, where Ethan had proposed, where we'd talked about building a life together. Now it would be where our story finally ended. He's choosing the location because it's isolated, Agent Martinez explained as we reviewed satellite photos of the coastline. Multiple escape routes, difficult to approach without being seen. But we can position teams in the dunes, use infrared surveillance, maintain overwatch from the highway. What if he doesn't come? What if this is just a way to confirm I'm alive so he can disappear permanently? Then we've lost nothing. But Mrs. Chambers, based on everything you've told us about your husband, do you think he's the kind of man who leaves loose ends? I thought about the systematic way he'd planned my murder, the meticulous organization of his files, the cold calculation in his voice when he'd called me a burden. No, I said. He doesn't leave loose ends. The next night, I drove to Deer Creek Beach with an FBI surveillance team tracking my every move. I wore a wire, carried a GPS beacon, and had agents positioned within 50 yards of the meeting location. But as I sat in my car in the empty parking lot, listening to the crash of waves against the rocks, I knew that all the protection in the world wouldn't change the fundamental truth of this confrontation. I was about to face the man who'd tried to murder me, who'd built his fortune on the deaths of innocent women, who'd betrayed everything I'd once believed about love and trust. And one way or another, only one of us was walking away from this beach. At 11:58 p.m., headlights appeared on the coastal highway. My heart hammered against my ribs as a familiar black sedan pulled into the parking lot, stopping 20 feet from my car. The door opened, and Ethan Chambers stepped out into the moonlight. My husband, my would-be killer, the man I'd once loved more than life itself. "Hello, Laura," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the sand. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. You've become quite the little detective." I got out of my own car, my legs unsteady but my voice firm. "Hello, Ethan. You look good for a fugitive." He smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like the man I'd married. Handsome, confident, completely in control. Then the moonlight shifted, and I saw the cold calculation in his eyes, the predatory patience of someone who'd killed before and would kill again. "We need to talk," he said. "Yes," I replied, my hand touching the wire hidden beneath my jacket. "We do." The final confrontation between Laura and Ethan Chambers was about to begin. The wind off the Pacific cut through my jacket as Ethan and I faced each other across 20 feet of sandy parking lot. In the moonlight, he looked like a stranger wearing my husband's face. Familiar features transformed by something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. Or maybe I had seen it, and I'd simply chosen not to recognize it. "You've caused quite a stir," he said, his tone conversational, almost amused. "The FBI has been very busy thanks to your little resurrection." "Not as busy as you've been. 8 women, Ethan? 8? His expression didn't change. "Is that the number they've confirmed?" I thought it might be higher by now. The casual admission hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't the man I'd married, the man who'd held me during thunderstorms and brought me soup when I was sick. This was someone else entirely, someone who spoke about murder the way others might discuss stock prices. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been planning to kill me?" Planning is such an ugly word. I prefer contingency management. He took a step closer, his hands visible, apparently unarmed. You were never supposed to be part of the business, Laura. You were supposed to be my wife, my partner, my refuge from the more complicated aspects of my work. Your work? You call murdering innocent women work? I call providing a service to desperate men a business opportunity. You'd be surprised how many husbands would rather be widowers than divorcees, especially when there's significant money involved. I felt bile rise in my throat. You're talking about human beings, women who trusted their husbands, their doctors. I'm talking about solving problems. Gerald Morrison's wife was going to leave him and take half his assets. David Kim's spouse had discovered his affair and was threatening to destroy his reputation. These men needed solutions, and I provided them. And Dr. Moreland just happened. To be available for hire? Ethan's smile was genuinely warm, which somehow made it more terrifying. Kent wasn't for hire initially. He had gambling debts, professional troubles, a license review that could have ended his career. I simply showed him how his skills could be monetized. The wire beneath my jacket felt hot against my skin. Every word he spoke was being recorded, transmitted to the FBI agents positioned in the dunes around us. But I needed him to be specific, to implicate himself completely. What about me? When did I become one of your problems to solve? When you started asking questions about the business, when you began wanting to be involved in decisions that were none of your concern, when your recovery from the cardiac episode took longer than expected and began interfering with my timeline. Your timeline for what? For liquidating assets and relocating operations overseas. The domestic market was becoming too risky, too much scrutiny from insurance companies and law enforcement. I'd been planning a transition for months. He took another step closer, and I could see the FBI's surveillance position in my peripheral vision. A slight shadow in the dunes that could have been Driftwood or Agent Martinez with a rifle. But then you had your little health crisis, and suddenly I had a dependent wife who needed constant care, who couldn't be left alone, who would have been a liability in any relocation scenario. So you decided to kill me. I decided to solve the problem efficiently. Your death would have provided the funds needed for the transition while eliminating the complications of your dependency. Kent assured me it would be painless, that you'd simply go to sleep and not wake up. The clinical detachment in his voice made my skin crawl. How merciful of you. I thought so. Much more humane than divorce proceedings that would have dragged on for years and left you impoverished anyway. Because you'd already spent everything we had. His expression hardened slightly. The business required significant investment. Market development, relationship building, infrastructure creation. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to build a network of medical professionals willing to commit murder for money? Apparently more expensive than you could afford. A temporary cash flow issue. Your life insurance would have resolved it completely. I felt a surge of rage so intense it was almost blinding. You're talking about murdering me for money like it's a business decision. It was a business decision. A difficult one, admittedly. I did love you, Laura, in my own way. But love doesn't pay debts or fund new operations. And now? Now you've complicated everything tremendously. Your cooperation with the FBI has exposed the entire network, destroyed years of careful development, cost me millions in potential revenue. He reached into his jacket, and I tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small device that looked like a smartphone. This is a signal jammer, he said. Military grade, very effective against recording devices and GPS trackers. Your FBI friends just lost contact with you. My blood turned to ice. The wire under my jacket had gone silent. No static, no transmission indicator, nothing. Don't look so frightened. I'm not going to hurt you, at least not immediately. We're going to take a little drive, you and I, somewhere more private, where We can discuss your future without federal surveillance. I'm not going anywhere with you. Yes, you are. Because if you don't, I'll disappear again, and this time I'll take measures to ensure you can never find me. But I'll be able to find you, Laura. Wherever you go, whatever name you use, however long it takes. And when I do, there won't be any FBI agents to protect you. The threat was delivered in the same casual tone he'd used to discuss his murder network. I believed every word. What do you want? I want you to get in your car and follow me. We're going to drive north to a little cabin I've been using as a safe house. Very remote, very private. Perfect for the kind of conversation we need to have. What conversation? The one where you tell me exactly what evidence you've provided to the FBI, what testimony you've given, and what measures I need to take to neutralize the damage you've caused. And then? His smile was gentle, almost loving. Then I'll decide whether you're more valuable to me alive or dead. I thought about the FBI agents in the dunes, unable to hear or track me now. I thought about Detective Sutter, who'd refused to close my case even when everyone else believed I was dead. I thought about Nina, who'd risked everything to help me gather evidence. And I thought about all the women who'd died because they'd trusted their husbands and their doctors, who'd never had the chance to fight back. No, I said. I'm sorry? I said no. I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm not getting in a car, I'm not driving to a cabin, and I'm not having any conversations about neutralizing damage. Ethan's expression shifted, the mask of civility slipping. For the first time. Laura, you don't seem to understand your situation. I understand it perfectly. You're a serial killer who's been caught. You're facing life in prison or execution, depending on which state prosecutes you first. You're desperate, panicked, and making mistakes. What mistakes? You came here. You admitted everything on tape before you activated that jammer. And you're standing in the middle of an FBI operation thinking you're in control. The jammer blocks local transmission. It doesn't affect the recording device built into my phone, which has been uploading everything to a secure server since I got out of the car. It was a lie, but a convincing one. I saw doubt flicker across his features. More importantly, I continued, you're assuming I'm still the woman you married, the dependent, fragile wife who needed your protection. But that woman died at Devil's Punch Bowl, Ethan. I'm someone else now. Laura, I'm someone who survived attempted murder, who built a new identity from nothing, who spent weeks gathering evidence while you thought you'd won. I'm someone who's not afraid of you anymore. You should be afraid. His voice dropped to a whisper. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Yes, I do. You're capable of murdering innocent women for money. You're capable of betraying people who trust you. You're capable of turning love into a weapon. I took a step toward him, and he actually stepped back. But you know what you're not capable of? You're not capable of accepting that you've lost. You're not capable of admitting that your victim outsmarted you. And you're not capable of recognizing that this conversation is over. I raised my voice, hoping the FBI agents could hear me despite the jammer. Federal agents, I'm Laura Chambers, and I'm identifying myself for your protection. The effect was immediate. Floodlights blazed to life from multiple positions in the dunes, illuminating the parking lot like daylight. Red laser dots appeared on Ethan's chest as FBI agents emerged from concealment, weapons drawn. Ethan Chambers, you're under arrest! Agent Martinez's voice carried clearly across the beach. Put your hands above your head and get on the ground. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, the signal jammer still in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Then he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure, murderous hatred. You think this is over? He snarled. You think arresting me ends anything? There are others, Laura. Others who know about you now. Who know what you've done. This network is bigger than you imagine, and you've made enemies you can't even— Get on the ground now! Agent Martinez was moving closer, her weapon trained on Ethan's center mass. He dropped the jammer and raised his hands, but his eyes never left mine. This isn't finished between us. Yes, it is, I said as FBI agents swarmed around him, forcing him to his knees. We're finished, Ethan. We have been since the night I heard you planning my murder. As they cuffed him and read him his rights, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months— peace. Not happiness, not satisfaction, but a deep, profound calm. The nightmare was over. The man who'd tried to destroy me was in custody. His network was collapsing, and for the first time since I'd overheard that conversation through the baby monitor, I was truly safe. But as they led Ethan away, I heard his voice one last time, carried on the ocean wind. Others know about you now, Laura. Others are coming. I pushed the threat from my mind. Let them come. I wasn't the woman they thought they were hunting. I was Laura Chambers, and I'd just proven that sometimes the dead come back stronger than ever. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd expected, considering it would house the trial of the decade. I sat in the witness waiting area, watching through a small window as reporters, lawyers, and spectators filled every seat. 6 months had passed since Ethan's arrest at Deer Creek Beach, and the case had become a media sensation, a story of murder, betrayal, and resurrection that captured the public imagination. But for me, it wasn't a story. It was my life, dissected and examined under the harsh lights of justice. Mrs. Chambers? The victim advocate, a kind woman named Patricia Reyes, touched my shoulder gently. They're ready for you. I nodded, smoothing the navy dress I'd chosen carefully. Professional but not severe, confident but not aggressive. Every detail mattered when you were testifying against your husband in a murder conspiracy trial. The walk to the witness stand felt endless. I was aware of every eye in the courtroom, every camera lens, every person who'd followed this case from the beginning. But most of all, I was aware of Ethan, sitting at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful businessman he'd once been. He didn't look at me as I was sworn in. He hadn't looked at me once during jury selection, during opening statements, during the parade of FBI agents and financial experts who'd testified about the scope of his network. It was as if I didn't exist. One final attempt to diminish me, to make me disappear, but I was done disappearing. Please state your name for the record, said Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, the lead prosecutor who'd become something of a celebrity herself during this trial. Laura Elizabeth Chambers. Mrs. Chambers, are you the same Laura Chambers who was reported missing on September 15th of last year and whose death was presumed after evidence was found at Devil's Punch Bowl? State Natural Area? I am. But you're very much alive. Yes, I am. Can you tell the jury why you allowed the world to believe you were dead? I looked at the 12 men and women who would decide Ethan's fate, trying to see past their carefully neutral expressions to the people underneath. Because I discovered that my husband was planning to murder me, and I believed that disappearing was the only way to stay alive long enough to gather evidence and bring him to justice. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even though everyone knew the basic facts of the case, hearing me say those words aloud seemed to electrify the room. Mrs. Chambers, I want to direct your attention to the evening of September 12th of last year. Can you tell the jury what happened that night? I took a breath and began the story I'd told so many times to FBI agents, to prosecutors, to the grand jury that had indicted Ethan and his co-conspirators. But this time felt different. This time, Ethan would have to listen. I told them about the baby monitor, about the conversation I'd overheard, about the moment I realized that the man I'd loved for 15 years was planning to kill me for money. I described the terror, the disbelief, the gradual understanding that my entire marriage had been built on a lie. What did you do after you heard this conversation? I recorded part of it on my phone. Then I began planning my escape. Why didn't you call the police immediately? Because I was terrified they wouldn't believe me. My husband was a respected businessman, Dr. Moreland was a trusted physician, and I was a woman recovering from a cardiac episode who could be dismissed as paranoid or delusional. So instead, you decided to fake your own death. I decided to save my own life by any means necessary. District Attorney Santos walked me through the months that followed. My time as Kate Montero, my work at the Redwood Motel, my growing understanding of the scope of Ethan's crimes. With each detail, I watched the jury's expressions shift from skepticism to horror to determination. Mrs. Chambers, during your investigation of your husband's activities, what did you discover? I discovered that he'd been running a murder-for-hire network for at least 4 years, possibly longer. He would identify financially desperate husbands who stood to benefit from their wives' deaths, introduce them to corrupt medical professionals like Dr. Moreland, and facilitate murders disguised as natural deaths. And how many women do you believe died as a result of this network? At least 8 that I could document, possibly more. Including yourself? I was supposed to be number 9. For the first time since I'd taken the stand, I allowed myself to look at Ethan. He was staring at his hands, his jaw clenched, his face pale. The mask of confidence he'd worn throughout the trial had finally slipped. Mrs. Chambers, can you identify the man who conspired to murder you? Yes. I pointed directly at him. My husband, Ethan Chambers. The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Rebecca Walsh, approached for cross-examination with the confidence of someone who believed she could discredit me. Mrs. Chambers, isn't it true that you've struggled with mental health issues following your cardiac episode? I struggled with the psychological impact of discovering that my husband wanted me dead. I wouldn't call that a mental health issue. I'd call it a reasonable response to attempted murder. But you did experience anxiety, depression, feelings of paranoia. I experienced fear, which, given that someone was actually trying to kill me, turned out to be entirely justified. Walsh tried several different approaches, questioning my memory of the overheard conversation, suggesting I'd misinterpreted Ethan's financial difficulties, implying that my resurrection was an elaborate scheme for attention. But every attack seemed to bounce off me harmlessly. I wasn't the diminished, fragile woman Ethan had tried to create. I was someone stronger, someone who'd survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged not broken, but transformed. Mrs. Chambers, Walsh said finally, isn't it possible that you misunderstood what you heard that night? That what you interpreted as a murder plot was actually 2 men discussing legitimate medical treatment options? No, I said firmly. It's not possible. I heard my husband and our doctor discussing dosages, timing, and how to make my death look natural. I heard them talk about insurance money and covering their tracks. There was no misunderstanding. But you were taking medication at the time, weren't you? Medication that could affect your perception, your memory. I was taking medication, prescribed by the same doctor who was planning to murder me. So yes, I was probably being drugged to make me more compliant, more vulnerable. Which makes what I overheard even more credible, not less. The exchange went on for another hour, but I could see that Walsh was fighting a losing battle. The evidence was overwhelming, the recordings were clear, and my testimony was consistent with everything the prosecution had presented. When I finally stepped down from the witness stand, I felt lighter than I had in months. I'd told my truth, faced my would-be killer, and refused to be silenced or diminished. The trial continued for another week, with testimony from Dr. Moreland, who'd been sentenced to 25 years in exchange for his cooperation, financial experts who detailed the scope of the conspiracy, and family members of other victims who'd finally learned the truth about their loved ones' deaths. But it was clear from the jury's faces during deliberations that the outcome was never really in doubt. When they returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and multiple counts of accessory to murder, I felt not triumph, but a deep, profound sense of closure. Ethan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led him away in shackles, he finally looked at me one last time. But instead of the hatred I'd seen at the beach, there was something else in his eyes. A kind of bewildered disbelief. As if he still couldn't understand how his perfect plan had failed. I understood. He'd never seen me as a real person, capable of independent thought and action. To him, I'd been a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed. The idea that I might fight back, might outwit him, might survive and expose his crimes, it simply didn't compute. But I had survived, and in surviving, I'd found something I'd lost years before I ever heard that conversation through the baby monitor. Myself. 3 months after the trial ended, I sat in my new office in Portland, reviewing the business plan for Chambers Consulting, a firm specializing in helping domestic violence survivors rebuild their lives and identities. The name was deliberate. I wasn't running from who I'd been anymore. My first client was scheduled to arrive in an hour, a woman whose husband had been arrested for financial abuse and who needed help navigating the complex process of establishing independence after years of control. Her story was different from mine, but the core was the same. A woman who'd discovered that the person she'd trusted most had been her greatest threat. My phone rang. Nina's voice was warm with satisfaction. "Did you see the news? They arrested 3 more doctors in the network, including one in Texas who'd been operating for over a decade. How many victims total now?" "At least 23 confirmed, possibly more. Your testimony opened floodgates, Laura. Families who'd accepted natural explanations for deaths are demanding new investigations." I looked out my window at the Portland skyline, thinking about all those women who'd died trusting the wrong people, who'd never had the chance I'd had to fight back. "It's not enough," I said. "What do you mean?" 23 women died because they believed their husbands loved them, because they trusted their doctors, because they never imagined that the people closest to them were capable of murder. We stopped this network, but there are others. So what do you want to do about it? I pulled up the website I'd been building, a resource for women who suspected they might be in danger, who'd noticed warning signs, who needed help distinguishing between paranoia and legitimate fear. "I want to make sure no other woman has to fake her own death to save her life," I said. "I want to teach them to trust their instincts, to document everything, to plan their own survival instead of depending on someone else's protection." "That's ambitious. I have time, and I have a story that people listen to." That evening, I drove to the Oregon coast, to a small beach not unlike the one where I'd confronted Ethan. But this beach held no dark memories, no associations with betrayal or violence. It was just a beautiful place where the Pacific met the land, where I could think clearly about the future. I pulled out my phone and dialed Detective Rami Sutter, who'd become an unexpected friend over the past months. "Laura, everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For not closing my case when everyone else believed I was dead. For trusting your instincts when the evidence pointed toward suicide." There was a pause. "You know what made me suspicious? The timing. Everything was too convenient, too neat. In my experience, real suicides are messy, impulsive, chaotic. Your death was too carefully staged. By me," I admitted with a laugh. "By someone who wanted to survive. That's not the psychology of a suicidal person." I watched the waves crash against the rocks, thinking about the woman I'd been a year ago, dependent, diminished, afraid to trust her own perceptions. That woman was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more aware of her own power. Rami, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm the same person I was before all this happened? He considered the question seriously. No, but I don't think you're meant to be. Surviving something like what you survived, it changes you. The question is whether it changes you for better or worse. And? You built a new life from nothing, exposed a serial killer, saved countless other women from becoming victims, and now you're using your experience to help other survivors. I'd say it changed you for the better. After we hung up, I sat on the beach until the sun set, watching the sky turn from blue to orange to deep purple. When the stars appeared, I made a decision I'd been considering for weeks. I pulled out my laptop and began typing. My name is Laura Chambers. 6 months ago, the world believed I was dead. I encouraged that belief because it was the only way to stay alive long enough to expose the man who tried to murder me, my own husband. This is my story. Not the version that appeared in newspapers or courtroom transcripts, but the real story of how I discovered that the person I trusted most was my greatest threat, and how I chose survival over safety, truth over silence. I'm writing this for every woman who's ever felt like something was wrong in her relationship, but couldn't put her finger on what. For every woman who's been told she's paranoid, oversensitive, or imagining things. For every woman who's wondered if the person sleeping beside her might be capable of the unthinkable. Trust your instincts. Document everything. Plan your own survival. And remember, sometimes the dead come back stronger than ever. I wrote until dawn, pouring my entire story onto the screen. The fear, the betrayal, the gradual discovery of my own strength. When I finished, I had the beginning of the book that would become a bestseller, the foundation for a speaking career that would take me around the country, and most importantly, a testament to the power of refusing to be silenced. They'd tried to kill me. Instead, I'd built a new life. They'd tried to silence me. Instead, I'd found my voice. They'd tried to erase me. Instead, I'd become more myself than I'd ever been. Laura Chambers was officially, definitively, triumphantly alive, and this time, I plan to stay that way. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.